"Sir, I need you to move to seat 34B. The request was cold. The man was old. And the seat he was being asked to give up, it was the only one that didn't leave him in pain. He'd paid extra. He'd served his country. And now, no one seemed to care. But what happened 10 minutes later changed everything. The cockpit door opened, and what the captain did next became a moment the entire cabin would never forget. Before we dive into this emotional story of sacrifice and respect, let us know in the comments, have you ever witnessed a quiet act of honor? Let's get started. The soft glow of the morning sun barely kissed the edge of Gate 19 at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. At 6:10 a.m., while most travelers stumbled through boarding announcements with coffee in hand, Samuel Hartley, age 81, sat upright, hands folded, back straight, a quiet calm surrounding him. Clad in a weathered gray coat and neatly pressed khakis, Samuel didn't look like much at first glance, but there was a story behind that limp, the kind that doesn't come from age or arthritis. His left leg, stiff and unforgiving, had carried him through a minefield in the Korean War. This trip mattered. He was flying from Asheville, North Carolina to Providence, Rhode Island to see his great-granddaughter, Layla, receive her white coat at Brown Medical School. She was the first in the family to become a doctor. Samuel had booked seat 9C aisle, extra legroom, no compromises. On a modest veteran's pension, he'd still paid extra, because pain doesn't care about price tags. The gate agent had smiled politely when he boarded early, but no one really noticed him. That was fine. Samuel hadn't come for attention. He just wanted to see her smile and sit through the flight without agony. Samuel had just settled into his seat, 9C aisle. Extra legroom. A small relief for his aching leg, injured when he was only 19 in a muddy field outside Pyeongtaek. He'd placed his modest leather duffel beneath the seat ahead, folded his coat neatly on his lap, and finally exhaled. But peace rarely lingers long in crowded airports. A voice, firm and practiced, cut through the hum of boarding chatter. "Excuse me, sir," said the young flight attendant. Her name tag read Aria, voice as composed as her neat bun and crisp uniform. "I'm going to need you to move to seat 34B. We have a family that needs to sit together, and this row is the only space that fits." Samuel blinked. "Ma'am, I chose this seat months ago. Paid extra for it. I need the legroom. Medical reason." Her smile didn't fade, but there was a flash of discomfort behind her eyes. "I understand, I really do. But we need to get this family settled so we can close the cabin doors." He looked ahead. A mother in leggings and a worn hoodie cradled a toddler. Two older kids trailing behind her like ducklings. Tired, fussy, scattered. He understood the need. Of course. But this wasn't a whim for him. This was about pain management, about survival. "I can't sit in a middle seat for a 2-hour flight. My knee locks up," Samuel replied gently, his southern drawl barely above a whisper. Aria's tone stiffened slightly. "Sir, if you don't move, the flight may be delayed." And just like that, the pressure was set. Samuel felt the shift. Passengers 3 rows back turned their heads. Eyes narrowed. Murmurs rose. Suddenly, he wasn't a decorated veteran with a service injury. He was the man holding up the flight for a mother and her children. An old man, resisting, selfish, inconvenient. He glanced down at his hands. They had held rifles, bandaged wounds, buried friends. Hands that had once been strong, now trembled slightly. He felt shame creep in where there should have been pride. "What's the seat?" he asked finally. 34B. "It's a middle seat, back near the lavatories." Of course it was. No legroom, no dignity. Just a wedge between strangers. He gave one last look at the mother, who mouthed a quiet "thank you" before he even agreed. Then, with a sigh that carried 50 years of silence. Samuel unclipped his belt, gripped the headrest, and rose. "My name is Samuel Hartley," he said to Arya in a calm but steady voice. "Sergeant, United States Army, retired. I'm giving up this seat under pressure. Please make a note." She nodded without response, already motioning the mother and her children forward as Samuel limped toward the back, each step a quiet surrender. No protest, no spotlight, just the weight of being displaced once again. Seat 34B was as miserable as Samuel had imagined, wedged between a teenager with noise-canceling headphones and a heavy-set businessman typing furiously on a laptop. The armrest was occupied before Samuel even sat down. He lowered himself slowly, jaw tightening as his knee bent past comfort. The air was stuffy. The hum of nearby lavatories made conversation, even if he wanted it, impossible. But no one was speaking to him anyway. No one made eye contact. No one acknowledged the exchange that had just taken place. And yet, someone had noticed. 3 rows ahead, across the aisle, a woman in a navy blue blazer sat motionless. Her name was Eleanor Price. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, and sharper instincts. A communications director for a Fortune 500 company. She had boarded just before Samuel. She had watched the entire thing unfold. And now? She couldn't stop watching him. He sat hunched, shoulders curled inward. His hands, gnarled and marked with time, rested quietly on his lap. One knuckle bent unnaturally from a decades-old break. His eyes didn't close. They stared forward, unblinking, as though remembering something only he could see. Eleanor didn't reach for her phone to post or rant online. She opened her contacts and typed a short message to a friend in the airline's corporate relations team. "Passenger Samuel Hartley, elderly, seat 9C reassigned despite medical note, now in 34B, treated poorly. Please escalate." She sent it, then set the phone down and turned to the window. It wasn't about outrage. It was about right. Back in 34B. Samuel shifted again. His leg was beginning to throb, the familiar pulse behind the kneecap building like stormwater behind a dam. He tried stretching, but the tight space allowed little. The businessman to his left never looked up. The teenager to his right had disappeared into a Marvel movie. He was invisible. Again, Samuel had known this kind of silence before. It wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of being overlooked, forgotten, passed over for someone louder, younger, more convenient. And as the minutes ticked by, the silence became heavier, the pain sharper. The flight attendants bustled through their final checks. None glanced in his direction. No apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. Until the cockpit door opened. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But the energy shifted. Passengers stilled. Heads turned. And walking down the aisle, every button of his pilot uniform pressed into perfect symmetry, came Captain Mason Reed, a former Air Force pilot, 25 years in service. Mason carried the kind of authority that didn't raise its voice. He walked with purpose until he reached row 34 and paused. "Mr. Hartley," he said, voice clear but kind, "I believe you're owed an apology." Samuel looked up, startled. And then, before anyone could speak, the captain saluted. A crisp, deliberate motion. The entire cabin hushed. And just like that, something sacred returned to the air. Captain Mason Reed stood motionless, arm raised in a crisp, formal salute, eyes locked on Samuel Hartley. The cabin, once filled with the rustle of seatbelts and overhead bins, now stood still. Silence fell over the rows like snow, soft, but undeniable. Samuel blinked, unsure how to respond. He hadn't been saluted in over 40 years, not since his retirement ceremony in a dusty VFW hall back in Asheville. Captain Reed's voice broke through the quiet. Steady as stone. Sergeant Samuel Hartley, United States Army. Retired. On behalf of this airline, and as a fellow serviceman, I offer my sincerest apology. Samuel opened his mouth, but nothing came. Emotion knotted in his throat. You should not have been asked to move, the captain continued. It was a failure in judgment, and today we make that right. He turned to the young flight attendant, Aria, who had suddenly shrunk beneath the weight of her own silence. Miss Bennett, Reed said with unwavering calm, you will escort Mr. Hartley to seat 1A. If that seat is occupied, request a volunteer. If no one steps forward, tell them the captain is asking. Passengers stirred. Whispers passed between rows. A few sat up straighter. Aria hesitated. But, sir, 1A is a first class. If 1A is unavailable, the captain interrupted, he will take my seat, or the co-pilot's. And if neither is available, I will give up mine. No one argued. No one dared. Samuel slowly rose, assisted gently by Captain Reed's hand beneath his elbow. The businessman beside him looked down, suddenly very interested in the floor. The teenager removed his headphones, shame flickering across his face. As Samuel stepped into the aisle, the shift wasn't loud, but it was monumental. Passengers moved aside. Some nodded respectfully. One man, cap in hand, placed it over his chest. 3 rows ahead. Eleanor Price sat motionless. Her breath caught somewhere between awe and grief. She didn't know why this moment hit her so hard. Maybe it was watching someone do the right thing without hesitation. Maybe it was seeing honor live and breathe. After all these years of seeing it traded for convenience, their eyes met briefly. No words passed, but something did a quiet understanding. As Samuel limped forward, step by stiff step, every person he passed felt the gravity of who he was. Not just an old man, not a disruption, a veteran, a grandfather, a man who once ran through fire for strangers and now simply asked to sit without pain. At row 1, a man in a suit stood without protest. Sir, he said gently, it's yours. With honor. Samuel nodded, voice still gone. As he settled into seat 1A, the softness of the leather, the space to stretch, none of it compared to what filled him now. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a burden. He felt seen. As the first-class seat embraced his tired frame, Samuel exhaled with a tremor he hadn't realized he was holding. The cushion gave way gently under him. His left leg finally extended without agony, for the first time in years. He wasn't bracing himself for the journey ahead, he was being carried by it. A crew member brought him a blanket, a small bottle of water, and something else far rarer, a look of genuine respect. But what happened next left the entire cabin breathless. From the middle rows, a man stood slowly, balding, early 40s, hoodie and jeans. His voice shook as he approached. Sergeant Hartley, he asked. Samuel turned his head, curious. I served under you, the man said, eyes already misting. Camp Hovey, Korea, 2001. You probably don't remember me, I was just a private, scared out of my mind. Samuel blinked, searching the man's face. I was Corporal Derek Lantham. You dragged me out of a frozen creek bed during a live fire exercise. You busted your knee worse. Remember, they gave you hell for it. A beat passed. Sir, Derek whispered, voice cracking. I never got to thank you. Silence swept the rows. No one breathed. Samuel nodded faintly, lips parting just enough for a gravelly, you made it home. That's all I needed to know. Derek's chest heaved once, then he turned and sat back down. But his presence had already sparked something greater. Captain Reed stepped into the intercom alcove and adjusted the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice firm but full of feeling. Before we depart, I need to speak not as a pilot, but as a man." He paused. Even the toddlers hushed. "Today, this airline failed a man who gave more to this country than most ever will. We asked him to give up comfort. We asked him to suffer quietly. And yet, even under pressure, he complied without anger. That kind of grace is rare." He glanced toward Samuel. "We do not take off while injustice sits quietly in our cabin," the captain continued. "And Sergeant Hartley, we see you. We thank you. And we honor you." The applause began soft, just 2 hands in the back, then a ripple, then a swell, not thunderous, but true. It rolled down the rows like a current of gratitude. Samuel didn't wave. He didn't bow. He just sat still, eyes shining. Fingers curled around the armrest like it was the only thing anchoring him to the moment. But deep inside, something old and weathered softened. A wall crumbled. A door reopened. He hadn't come for glory. He came to see his great-granddaughter. But in that moment, surrounded by strangers who were no longer strangers, Samuel Hartley received something far greater, a restored sense of worth. The plane soared eastward through soft clouds, but inside, Samuel Hartley sat motionless in seat 1A, cradled not just by leather and legroom, but by something deeper. He was warm, not from the blanket or the coffee brought by the quiet flight attendant, but from the moment that had just passed. A stranger saluted him. A fellow soldier thanked him. A cabin full of people had seen him. He stared out the window, the sun glinting off the wing like a silver promise. It wasn't pride, he felt it was relief. For decades, Samuel had learned to shrink. He'd learned that in America. Growing old meant growing invisible. He'd stood patiently at pharmacy counters, waited quietly when his VA paperwork was misplaced, endured the sideways glances when he walked too slow. He didn't speak of war anymore. His late wife, Ellen, had once said that some memories were better left buried, but some memories still lived in his knees, his back, his hands. Yet today, without asking, someone had dug one of those memories up, held it to the light, and said, "We remember." As the flight continued, something else shifted inside him, something subtle. He sat straighter. His breath came easier. Across the aisle, Eleanor Price continued to glance toward him, her eyes thoughtful. She hadn't opened her laptop again. She'd closed the lid after Captain Reed's speech and hadn't touched it since. Instead, she just watched. She watched an old man once forced to move now settle into himself. She watched dignity return to someone who'd nearly been denied it. And slowly, her perspective shifted too. She thought about the times she'd rolled her eyes at the slow-moving man in front of her at the grocery store. The times she'd sighed at long VA lines or brushed off an old story from her uncle who'd served. But now she knew better. Samuel wasn't just a reminder of the past. He was a lesson in quiet resilience, the kind you don't see unless you're paying attention. When the attendant came by to offer pretzels or a snack box, Samuel smiled gently and declined. He wasn't hungry. He was full of something he hadn't tasted in years. Belonging. For the rest of the flight, passengers left him alone, but not in the way they had before. It wasn't isolation. It was respectful space. A few nodded as they passed him on their way to the restroom. One man dropped a folded napkin with the words, "Thank you for your service." He kept that napkin. Because for Samuel, these gestures weren't small. They were breadcrumbs back to his identity, breadcrumbs back to a man who had once led troops, saved lives, and held on to hope in the darkest nights. And somewhere between Asheville and Providence, Samuel Hartley rediscovered not just his seat, but his place in the world. The plane touched down in Providence just after noon, wheels kissing the runway with a soft hum. The cabin stirred to life, seatbelts clicked, carry-ons shifted, conversations resumed. But Samuel Hartley remained still in 1A, hands folded on his lap, gaze fixed out the window. He wasn't in a rush, not today. For the first time in years, no one was rushing him either. As passengers filed past, a man in his 30s jeans, wedding ring, toddler in tow paused and said, "Thank you, sir." Truly. A woman a few rows behind placed her hand gently on Samuel's shoulder and whispered, "We needed to see that." Samuel nodded, humbled. He had said very little that day, but somehow it had all been heard. Captain Reed stood at the exit, waiting. When Samuel approached, the two men locked eyes, no salute this time, just a handshake firm, reverent, and understood. "Safe journey." "Sergeant," the captain said quietly, "and thank you for everything." On the jet bridge, Eleanor Price caught up to him. She didn't say much, just placed a hand on his coat sleeve and murmured, "You reminded all of us who we're supposed to be." Samuel gave her the faintest smile, the kind that carried oceans. At baggage claim, his great-granddaughter Layla stood in full white coat, a cardboard sign barely held together by duct tape and love welcome. Grandpa Sam? The moment she saw him, she ran. He didn't brace. He let her hit him full force, arms tight around his chest, her tears soaking into his collar. "Your leg." "Oh. Grandpa, are you okay?" "I've had worse," he said with a chuckle, finally letting the weight of the day melt into warmth. That evening, as the sun fell behind the Rhode Island trees, Samuel sat on the porch swing of his daughter's house, listening to Layla talk about her rotation at the children's hospital. He watched her hands move so full of life and purpose, and realized he hadn't just lived long enough to see the future, he'd lived long enough to shape it. Later that night, when Layla showed him the viral video on her phone, Captain Reed's speech, the cabin applause, the salute at seat 34B, Samuel didn't say a word. He just watched. But when it ended, she hugged him again, and this time, he held on. A week later, a letter arrived from the airline. A formal apology, a refund, and a card that read, "Mr. Hartley, you are now a lifetime guest of honor with our airline. No booking codes, no fees. Just tell us where you're going. We'll get you there." He placed the card beside an old photograph of Ellen, not out of pride, but remembrance. Because that day on the plane wasn't just about an upgrade. It wasn't about comfort. It was about something far greater. A seat at the table of respect, a return to dignity, and the quiet restoration of what never should have been forgotten. In a world that moves too fast, we often forget the quiet sacrifices made by those who carried us here. Veterans, elders, the ones who once stood tall and now walk slower. They carry stories written in scars, not headlines. And too often, we overlook them for the sake of convenience. But all it takes is one voice, one moment of courage to restore what time and neglect have stolen. Whether it's a seat on a plane or a place in line, offering grace isn't just kindness, it's justice. And when we choose to honor someone instead of ignoring them, we remind everyone around us that respect still matters. Samuel didn't ask for applause. He never needed it. But when it came, he received it with the same quiet strength he'd carried through every battle. In daily life, we all pass by people like Samuel, quiet elders with deep stories behind tired eyes. We rush past them in grocery aisles, sigh when they slow us down, or overlook them in waiting rooms. But the lesson is simple: slow down, pay attention, and remember, hold the door, let them speak. Ask how they're doing, not out of pity, but out of respect. If you see injustice, no matter how small, say something. Whether it's a veteran moved from a seat or someone dismissed in a conversation, your voice can be the one that brings balance back. We believe stories like Samuel's deserve to be remembered. If you agree, Hit the like button and subscribe for more. Drop a comment below and let us know who's the veteran or elder in your life that you'll never forget and why